And yes, you did see a pie chart. I'm well known for not looking pie charts. Okay, so it's all about, Microsoft are really embracing this sort of functionality of people's work and their lives being on the road. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, it was all about work was a place that people went to. So my dad, for example, went to work and then he came back from work. But it no longer seems just a place that we go to. It's a thing that we do all the time. I received an email from someone who told me they were in the bath. I didn't need to know that piece of information, but you are starting to see much more of a mix where people are working, and I do this. I'll be on my BlackBerry, sending emails while I'm doing other things. It allows you to multitask. So very briefly, Microsoft themselves and other vendors, there are other vendors of course, really recognise that mobile business intelligence is becoming more prevalent. Yeah? And you start to see much more of a move towards that. This week you might have noticed that Microsoft purchased a really large tablet manufacturer called Pixelated Perfect, I think. And then I looked at the device itself and I thought, that's just a really huge iPad. And then I thought, well, why didn't Microsoft just do that? Or Apple? Why didn't Steve Jobs think, well, I'll buy that massive, great big 41-inch iPad? So people are starting to become more interested in it. So what is mobile business intelligence? It's all about giving people the data they need, when they need it, when they want it, wherever they happen to be, and preferably on any device that they have. You can imagine the nightmare it's going to be for some IT departments, and probably quite a lot of IT departments, to look after these devices, because I think people start to use their personal devices to access corporate data assets. And that introduces its own risk as well. Not everybody looks after their devices at home very well, so you can have viruses and all sorts of things going on. So it's all about being very careful with and very carefully managing it. I don't think anybody has really good, clear answers on how to do that. I think we're still finding out about it. We have some ideas though. Okay. So when you actually ask users, what do you want to see in a mobile device? Usually the answer is very similar to what they say normally, which is basically, I want everything, I want it now, and I want it yesterday, really. And you have to say, well, we know you want all your data wherever you can be, but actually on a mobile device, it's much more difficult to try and make a meaningful interaction because you simply just don't have the large real estate on a large screen. People often have very large screens at their work, and they can sometimes assume they will simply get the same fast access that they do on their corporate LAN. So it's much more complex. But when you really boil it down to, they want, for example, to do lots of operational business intelligence on the mobile device. Myself and my colleague are delivering a solution at the moment where medical staff will be able to see their data on an iPad wherever they may be. So it's really interesting times, and there's loads of different applications for operational business intelligence. When I talk about operational BI, I really mean the sort of the information that you need to know in order to run your business and make your business run more effectively. As the case of the medicine, it's not always about business, but it usually is. Lower priorities, I don't see so much call for geospatial mapping on a mobile device. I have done it. It does, and it can take time to render. I think sometimes you can only take a little bit of the message of the data and put it on a small screen, just simply because it's hard to zoom in and out. That may change over time as the technology catches up. So people tend to want real-time data on their device, rather than this. They want historical data as well, but I used to find in BI solutions people didn't tend to ask for as much real-time data unless it was an operational environment. But my own experience, and which may change, is that I see much more operational real-time requirements on a mobile device. So I'm interested in the user audience. What do they need to see in order to run their business more effectively? Okay, so I'm sorry that's a bit small. But some of the best practices, I've got some examples, but briefly it's all about You just have to make things in the mobile device as simple and as clear as possible. Remember, you've got connectivity. You've also got fat fingers. Some people have. They're trying to access and do things in the iPad, and it can be quite dainty sometimes. So you have to teach people, I think, how to interact with the device quite effectively. If you're using a stylus, not many people do. I personally don't see that many people using them, but it can sometimes help just to get those very fine points on a graph, for example. Okay. How not to do mobile business intelligence. I'll talk about this first, and then we'll talk about how to do it. Something like that in a mobile device takes up a lot of space on a very small screen. And that's true whether it's an iPhone or an iPad. There are other devices. The Google Nexus is coming out soon. I'm looking forward to seeing that one. But it can be quite difficult because people start to, with the pie chart, you can't distinguish very well in those colours. You can't assume you've got the same colour resolution on the small screen that you have on the larger one. It can look quite different. So sometimes if you take an iPad report and put it next to the large user screen, they can look quite different. So we have to sort of manage the expectations sometimes as well.
Sure.
The other thing is as well that the legends can be quite difficult to read. These blues, for example, are quite difficult to distinguish. So psychological studies tend to show that when you have that sort of legend, people's eyes move back and forth from the legend to the slice, to the legend, to the slice, back and forth, back and forth. And you do eye tracking studies which show that to be the case. And the problem there is it can take more cognitive loads, they call it, where people have a harder time remembering what the chart is about and what slice corresponds to its colour. Essentially, the takeaway point is that it's more difficult for people to hold everything in their heads. We want to try and make it simple as possible. Okay.
You can make it better by making it 3D, though, can't you?
Oh, 3D, what can I say? Okay, so normally when you're building a report, the structure tends to be summary, like a dashboard, and then you can zoom and filter to see the data you want to see, and then straight down to the detail. There's a lot of psychological literature that suggests that's how people are most comfortable viewing their data. If you give someone a table, they can not see the patterns in it because it's the numbers, and it's only when you start to visualise it you start to see patterns you perhaps didn't see before. It's not about one competing with the other, it's about different things having different purposes and putting the two together to give a picture of your data. So if I don't tend to like using a lot of parameters in a report. So for example, if you do it in SharePoint, you can already have the links available and the reports populated, so people are not having to work quite as hard on the mobile device to try and manipulate all of the parameters. So I'm conscious of time. What we have, the way I've been mobilising business intelligence up to this point has really been using Tableau software, which I don't have examples with me, but Tableau offered a very good iPad solution. But then I started to look at what SharePoint can offer, because SharePoint can actually, if you have SharePoint Enterprise, it gives you mobile pages by default. So I started to look at that, and then I found this really interesting thing, which is every 3 months or so, SharePoint gives you, the SharePoint team give you cumulative updates. Basically, they're just like service packs, and they give you new functionality, the bug fix, for example, in SharePoint. And what they did in December 2011 was they did a mobile-oriented cumulative update. Yeah. So what they did was, and I hope you can see this all right, they took Performance Point. Has anybody used Performance Point? A few people? Yeah. They took Performance Point, which up till now had been a bit of a lost product, and that's Performance Point there. Just a quick example of how it can look. And they took that and they mobilised it, and when you see it in action, it's actually really nice. So with something like that on a mobile device, the users can interact with it quite nicely. Performance Point used to be Pro Clarity, and it sits really well in cubes. So it's a really interesting thing they did, that they'd gone so much for analysis services, and also for performance point. So what we've found is reporting services reports don't always work as well in the iPad as you might like. They do render, but you can't do things like export the data. So the little buttons at the top that you normally see in a reporting services report, they come up with things like you can export it to a TIFF file, but you can't actually. So it's not quite there, but they don't actually say in the cumulative update that they support reporting services on that device anyway. You can try it. It's all about building your report around the limitations of the device. Then hopefully as reporting services catches up, excuse me,